Welcome to Jack's Corner, where conservative values meet national headlines, and truth and reality have a seat at the table. From Louisville, Kentucky, here's your host, Jack Richardson.
Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality has a seat at the table. And it's not my truth, it's not your truth, it's all of our truth, and it's what we live by if we want to basically prosper as a people and as a nation. So with that, let's get into the topics for today, and I want to start with the tyranny of the unelected, what I call the dereliction of the Supreme Court. Folks, when justice is delayed, justice is denied. We have a crisis in this country, and it starts and ends with the judicial system. It's a top-down problem starting with the Supreme Court, which is caught up in an arcane theory and principle. The rules of 200 years ago no longer apply because we no longer have a self-governing populace, much less a self-governing leadership. Let me explain this another way. Why did our forefathers say this kind of government only works for a moral people? Well, it's because a moral people are self-governing. How about that? Our leaders are a reflection of who we are as a people. As Scripture warns us, we are not to think more highly of ourselves than we should. Well, good luck on that today. We are on the precipice of recovery and restoring our freedoms under Trump, or we will devolve into a permanent state of tribalism, suppression, and corruption. If you only knew the evil, the wickedness, and the corruption of the Democrat left, you would have a difficult time coming up with an adjective or a descriptive word encompassing the character of the left. You have no clue as to how much peril you are in, even with Trump in office. But if he were not in office, it would be game over, folks. So with that, I have removed from you the excuse that you never knew. Now you do. Now you have been told, and not by untested and unproven opinion. So let's get back to the tyranny of the unelected. As many of you have already surmised, our Supreme Court is the tip of the spear. Their failure to operate in reality is devastating. They are not operating in real time. They spend too much time staring at themselves in the mirror and in their black robes, thinking themselves so important that they will be remembered and revered for all of eternity. I dare you to recall the Supreme Court justices of the 1950s or the 60s or the 70s. Allow me this one little punch to the gut for all those who are more focused on themselves than on doing what is right by their fellow man. Before they take their last breath, and I guess that applies with all of us, they will be irrelevant. Once buried, they will be forgotten. As we live in the land of the living, not the dead. That goes for all of us. No one will be thinking about them, nor will they be focused on their legacy, nor will it provide them any comfort. They will most likely be reviled by kids at Harvard or like institutions absorbed in self-indulgence and importance. As I have said many times, thank God for death and hell, as it will bring humility to us all, and the higher you climb, the more bitter the reality is at the end. Yeah, I like to spit in the eye of those who are so consumed in themselves when there is so much suffering in the world. I live daily in the glory of knowing that all those who elevated themselves and glorify themselves will one day be brought low in a brutal emergence of the truth. Over the last decades, many good people, good Americans, have suffered with the loss of all they've had and all they have because the elites allowed foreign countries to take their jobs through tariffs. But our sanctimonious leaders in this country thought themselves so intelligent and insightful to a new reality that really wasn't. As President Trump has been trying to correct the injustice brought about by the corrupt ideologues, that is, judges appointed by the Democrat left, they continue to impose greater limits on your freedoms. Trump has been stifled by rogue judges bent on implementing a psychopathic ideology as opposed to interpreting the law. So what did the Supreme Court do? Well, like gods on Mount Olympus, they never feel any urgency. Let me repeat that. And this is a problem with the Supreme Court, and that's why they're becoming more and more irrelevant or more and more a threat to this society and to America. They act like they're gods on Mount Olympus, and they never feel any urgency. And that gets back to what I was saying earlier, where justice delayed is justice denied. They are insulated, as so many elites are. While U.S. District Court judges were committing constitutional treason, the Supreme Court fiddled like Nero as America burned. and the lower federal court leftist and activist judges wrongly subsumed the authority of the executive branch of government. Now, shame on the Supreme Court for not stepping in and controlling and directing the lower federal courts. Except for 2 justices on the Supreme Court, I have no goodwill toward them and think more in the terms of Psalm 109 for them than anything else. You can always count on a liberal and leftist judge to rule consistently with his or her authoritarian and Machiavellian worldview. You can never count on a conservative judge to rule consistently with the reality that they're in. Time and time again, the conservative appointees disappoint as they live in a psychosis, that is, a detachment from the contemporary reality in which they exist. Yeah, the left is psychotic, but evilly so, with a homegrown morality, not a transcendent one. Let me prove my point about some of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court. It was just a few years ago when Chuck Schumer, a radical leftist Democrat from New York, threatened the justices over Roe v. Wade. Then the Democrats threatened to pack the court and nullify the conservative influence. Then, because of the stochastic terroristic threats by the Democrats, there were assassination attempts against the conservatives. Yet the conservatives still fail to see that their intransigence, their dilatory tactics, and slowness to act place not only the nation at risk, but their own jobs and their own lives. When war starts, I'm not only referring to just the type where bullets are flying. All theory, philosophy, and rules go out the window, and you fight to win. You fight to survive. The Supreme Court is guilty of malfeasance, neglect, malpractice, and dereliction of duty. They treat the Constitution as if it were a suicide pact. So what's the cure? And, well, here's my cure. Congress must exercise its authority and strip the courts of their jurisdiction and authority as no other body can do. Also, they need to append to any legislation denying the right of the courts the authority to review any particular piece of legislation. Also, we must reform the removal process and rid ourselves of the arcane process of impeachment, as it cannot happen in today's world. And thus, we have created what I call judicial tyrants. And a lot of people and commentators have talked about the judicial tyranny that we're in today. And we're seeing it all across the country as the leftist appointed judges are trying to block Trump from exercising his duties as president, the president that you elected. The next thing I want to do is mandate that judges no longer wear black robes. Now, this may seem silly, but they are flawed humans like the rest of us. They are not gods, and they are frequently wrong and overturned on appeal. Finally, if your rate of reversal reaches a certain point, you should be removed. So, back to the title of this article, we are experiencing the tyranny of the unelected. We have screwed ourselves, and it is time to bring a reality to these judges who are corrupt ideologues and abusing their positions. It's time to remind judges of their humanity and their mortality, and that they will be judged as they have judged. Now let's move on to the next topic that I want to address, and it's what I titled, It's a Tour of Duty, Not a Career. And this is a problem with most politicians. The reason Congress has become irrelevant is that its occupants are there serving themselves, not you. How could it be otherwise if their expectations are that their mission is a career? This has led to a paralysis in advancing legislative fixes for the ills that plague the country. It's a classic conflict of interest. As a consequence, Congress is unable to represent the people who elected them and to enact legislation to address the needs of the country. They are constantly deadlocked in debate, not so much over what is in the best interest of the country, but what is in their best interest and what best serves them. By the time Congress gets around to acting, the country is suffering and in despair. The elite ruling class never suffers. They are insulated. For example, presidential executive orders have grown exponentially. Now, follow me on this. Going back to President Washington, to President Adams. Washington to Adams issued no executive orders, as it was assumed that Congress would do its job. Imagine that. Even up to McKinley, executive orders were rare. Then as we moved into the 1900s with Teddy Roosevelt, it started ticking up. he had 150 executive orders per year. Then with the most wicked president we've had, and that might be up for debate when we start talking about Obama and some of the more recent ones, the wicked president that started all the slide for America was Woodrow Wilson. And at that time, the executive orders ticked up to 220 per year. And then we had FDR, and it went to 300 per year. And based on the current trajectory, Trump is on course for 400 a year. Now, in Trump's case, this may be good in that the longer an executive order stays in place, the more likely they will be permanent. This is what happens when your legislature is paralyzed and deadlocked. But executive orders are not the way it should be. So shame on Congress. They have rendered themselves irrelevant and inept due to their patent, corrupt self-interest. So what would you expect when elected radical leftists whose goal is the destruction of the Constitution and your freedoms? Well, the public is the problem and the media that influences them, because there is no consequence or accountability for the leftist media and the lies that they tell and the deceit that they openly and unapologetically practice. The dirty little secret as to the Democrat left's hatred of Trump is that the culture, not Congress, will make Trump's executive orders permanent, and the Democrats know it. However, you can thank God that it is Trump signing the executive orders and not the demonically influenced psychotics in the Democrat Party. Now, moving on to what I call the left, the lie, and the devil. Folks, the wrath of God burns hottest against liars. Most don't understand the degree of God's wrath, but the word in Greek that is used in Scripture to describe his wrath and anger is such that it burns with an intense, unrestrained, passionate anger. He's not just mildly annoyed. It is an unbridled fury. His rage, God's rage, is an anger that is directed against ungodliness and unrighteousness. And that is why we are told that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, because once his wrath is released, it is unmitigated. There is one action, one sin that God finds not only ungodly, but unrighteous. And that particular sin is the suppression of the truth. It is the sin against the truth. It's the suppression of the truth. And in the Greek, that's called the katakain. The Greek had a word for it called the katakain, which is an active and forceful suppression of the truth. And that is the collective agenda of the left today, which controls the Democrat Party. Now, if you can't see that by now, then such blindness can only lead to one conclusion, and that is you are falsely assured as to your own goodness, and for those proclaiming Christianity and a false assurance of salvation. In my more than 200 published articles and podcasts, my central theme is exposing the lie. And as I have revealed, the trail almost exclusively leads back to the Democrat left and all their messaging, pronouncements, policies, and legislation. It is also exclusively found in their propagandists, that is, the legacy media. And I say exclusively as over 95% of those in the media are Democrats, as it is in our schools and universities. As a quick for instance, at the University of Louisville's School of Law, there is only one Republican faculty member, and it is we, the people, who are at fault. We tolerate it and then wonder what's wrong with our kids in the country. Now, I'm not going to leave the Republicans out of this, but fortunately, evil has not subsumed the entirety of the party as it has the Democrat Party. When I see it in the Republican Party, I'm quick to call it out, which does not always make me popular within my own caucus. It is so important to remember that the lie cannot prove itself, and it is never the solution to any problem for which we elect leaders to solve for us. Scripture clearly tells us that under such conditions, nations perish, as will the individual who indulges in pathological lying, as we see in the Democrat left. In all the years of my existence, I have never seen the degree of nor the unabashedness of those who lie even when they know you know that they are lying. But be warned, if you support those who you know to be lying, then that makes you a liar too. And your fate will be the same as theirs. That is why I have said many times, given the state of the Democrat Party today, you cannot be a Christian and vote and support the evil that they speak and do. Godliness does not support evil, and you can't do both, and you can't be both. So are Republicans saints? No. And I have pushed for the removal of many of them from office. I have said and will say again, I am an equal opportunity criticizer. When you assume the position of authority over others, you are in what I call a fiduciary capacity. And it is a fiduciary capacity. And that type of person in that kind of position must act with the greatest fidelity toward those they govern. Lying is a disqualifier. Folks, we must purge those who suppress the truth and have made lying their occupation. We see it daily, and I not only urge you not to lie or live a lie, but to banish those in leadership who do. Now, this next item is of importance to me as an attorney, and because of the bias epidemic in which we live, not just with judges, but with juries. And I have asked this question so many times, and this is an article that I've entitled, "Is it time for artificial intelligent juries?" And I contend that reform is needed for the courts of injustice. The time is well past due for major reforms in our judiciary. Injustice flows from the courts these days like the waters falling over Niagara Falls. Today we see rogue judges who are exclusively leftist, Democrat-appointed ideologues, dispensing orders and injustice to fit their agenda. The law be damned. If it were not for the antiquated removal process via impeachment making removal impossible, then removal would look like a revolving door, at least in the beginning, until the judges got the message that if you want to keep your job, then follow the rules, follow the law, and interpret the law and shelve your political biases. As we have seen since Trump's inauguration, every leftist Democrat-appointed judge has colluded to block the electorate's choice of Trump and the measures he campaigned on to turn the country around. In fact, for the first time in polling, 50% now believe the country is on the right track, and consumer confidence has rebounded massively. But all that aside, these political activist judges are being appealed and reversed again and again. So what does that tell you? Well, there is a profound bias that has no place in our judicial system, and it's got to be fixed. Let me give you a quick aside here to blunt some of the anticipated and misleading counters to the statement that these are all Democrat appointees, which is that some were Republican appointees who ruled against Trump. Well, first of all, as with the recent trade court ruling where the three-judge panel ruled against Trump's tariffs on European countries, 2 were Republican appointees, and 1 was appointed by Obama. Here's what you don't know. The rules of that court were that only 5 out of the 9 that sit on the court could be of the same party. So there was a restriction on who could be appointed to fill a vacancy. As the facts would have it, in this instance, all 3 of those judges were Democrat activists, but the media didn't tell you that. Yes, Democrats appointed by Republicans. Also, in other jurisdictions, the senator of that state will make appointments or appointee suggestions, and this ties the hands of the president many times. And in many situations, it's a selection between bad, terrible, and horrible. And this is an area that has to change in the appointment process. So let's go back to the question that I'm posing. Should we have artificial intelligence for jurors? Jurors today decide not on the facts of the case anymore, but on the message they want to send society. In my 4 decades as an attorney, I have seen horrendous results coming out of the juries, as juries are nothing but a collage of different biases. We try to weed out the worst, but as any good attorney and even insurance companies now know today, you cannot trust a jury, and don't let any attorney tell you otherwise, and if they do, fire them. Now, in many instances, you may not be able to avoid the jury, but try you must. One of the senior partners in a large firm here in Louisville years ago was famous for his saying that in many cases a bad settlement is better than a good trial. That may sound contradictory, but given the experiences that attorneys have in battling biases and biased individuals that make up juries, you would agree. I have given many anecdotes in the past that prove my point on this with regards to juries. As many of us all recall in the O.J. Simpson murder trial, the jury did what was called jury nullification, where the jury ruled against the evidence. This is a gross injustice, and in a more current and ongoing case of Luigi Mangione, who murdered the healthcare executive in New York City, I predicted that if this goes to a New York jury, and given the sick lust that so many women for this GQ murderer, there is a high likelihood they will set him free in what is called jury nullification, all because of their sick biases. So why do I say that we need an artificial intelligence jury? Well, I am presupposing that AI would be focused on only what is relevant and would be void of bias. Now, there is a question today as who is programming AI. Some have suggested that those of leftist and liberal leanings are teaching AI to lie, and that is because the left cannot tolerate any dissent from their worldview or opinion. Also, this area in computer and programming sciences seems to attract the Viagra-addicted geeks living in their mother's basements. They are all too often on the fringe of reality and live in their own universe, which is problematic given that AI has some frightening and dangerous aspects about it, even though it could be a benefit in many ways, many great ways. Nevertheless, if AI could be programmed to judge based on the facts and only the facts, then more accurate and just decisions could come from a jury and a jury deliberation. In fact, we could get rid of juries, as there is no such thing as a jury of your peers anymore. Now just think about that. The word peers means you're equal. Now, given the makeup of jurors, as we have seen so many times on TV, there are many members of our society where they would be judged by those who are not their peers. It is criminal that such an obvious problem hasn't been corrected by now. The laws and the rules of our courts have to change. Now, in a recent matter, which was a quasi-judicial situation where I was sitting on a panel in an appellate review situation, I argued against the wishes of a high-level political party representative that was generally aligned with me, who was wanting to bend the rules and essentially wanted to retry the merits of the case in violation of the rules regarding the appellate review. Well, yes, this could be costly relationally for me, but it was the right thing to do. And most can't do that, and particularly jurors. Injustice should never flow from the courts as it does today. The courts and juries are in chaos and out of control as bias is running rampant, whether it be political, economic, racial, or even petty things like, I don't like the way you look. That kind of stuff has to change and has to change soon. Now, I've been pondering what that change would look like and have often joked that I'd just as soon have a robot make decisions based on the facts in reality as opposed to the unjust biases of flawed men. Given the advances of AI, it could be the answer. As with anything, there is the good and the bad. Just like with nuclear power, it can bring light into your life and save lives, or it can destroy. So far, in that regard, we have managed it, and it is giving life to we electric beings, which is what we've become. All of this being said, it's time for you to start demanding a justice system that dispenses justice, and for this to happen, massive reform is needed, and it is needed now. So this leads me to my next topic, and that is the Supreme Court does not have the last word. I'll repeat that. The Supreme Court does not have the last word. They only have the powers given to it by Congress. The Supreme Court has basically been a hemorrhoid to this country from the very beginning. Occupied by men until recently, they have been allowed to act as if they had plenary power, that is, absolute authority. And as our forefathers soon learned, that branch of government that was designed to be the weakest became a Frankenstein because the inept and inefficient Congress failed to exercise its powers. If we continue to proceed as we have over the last 50 years, as the appointments to the court became and have become more political and have become filled with political activists with an agenda other than interpreting the Constitution, they've become tyrants. Where once we were to have checks and balances to keep tyrants away, such as legislators could be voted out of office, As with a president, the legislature passed laws and the president could veto them. The Supreme Court was to determine if the laws passed were constitutional, not remake or make law. This goes for the lower federal courts as well. But there was no rational, reasonable check on the power of the judiciary. It could only be curtailed by impeachment if the Congress failed to exercise its powers to set the limits on the judiciary's jurisdiction. As usual, the Congress has failed once again, and today we have these unelected leftist jurists telling the executive branch, that is the president, how to run the executive and foreign policy and the military. This was never the power granted to the courts. They are rogue actors and in violation of the constitutions themselves. But who's going to put a check on that out-of-control power? Well, contrary to what many think, the Supreme Court does not have the last word. Let me repeat that again. The Supreme Court does not have the last word. Andrew Jackson had the answer. When the court overstepped its bounds, he told the court, try enforcing it. You see, the courts do not have an army or a police force. They can give an opinion, and that is it. I like Andrew Jackson's approach. Thomas Jefferson also slapped down the federal courts and eliminated around 14 district courts as the legislature sets the boundaries and the jurisdiction of the courts. The Congress can limit what the courts can review and render an opinion, or they can simply just starve them out, as Congress has the power of the purse. We don't need to rely upon impeachment to rein in the courts. It simply takes the courage and boldness to tell the Supreme Court or any federal court that they have overstepped their power and refused their orders. They cannot do anything about it as they have no enforcement mechanism. That is totally in the control of the executive branch. Each branch has a right to protect its turf. By giving the Supreme Court ultimate power, you have created tyranny of the unelected. Give some thought to this. The way we are dealing with the courts today allows them to control everything. Justice Roberts said that the Supreme Court is the final authority. No, it's not. A tyrant couldn't have said it any better. As it stands now, the Supreme Court can grant itself unlimited power. This must stop now, and the President or Congress must find an instance to refuse an order and then dare the Supreme Court to enforce it. Guess what? The Supreme Court can't enforce it as they don't have the means to enforce it. Only the executive branch has that power. I'd truly like to see the executive go in and arrest judges for interfering in law enforcement, as we have seen since Trump's inauguration. Folks, it's time to contact your legislators and remind them of their powers and duties, particularly the power over the courts. If the courts have the final and absolute power without any check and balance, then you have tyranny, because the law becomes whatever they say it is, and the people are at their mercy. Just think about how many times the courts have been wrong and reversed. Even the Supreme Court has reversed itself. It's time to push the courts back into their lane and warn them there will be consequences in the form of removal and not just by impeachment. Okay, folks, before I go, I have to demonstrate to you once again how dishonest the Democrat left is. President Trump has been in office less than 150 days, and the price of eggs has, dropped 61%. But I don't want you to forget the Democrats were condemning him on day 2, and that he had broken his promises, and they were trying to convince you that on day 2, he was a failed president. Why would anyone ever trust people like that to govern? Why would they ever trust them with their vote again? Well, that's it for now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jack Richardson, and this is Jack's Corner.